Go ahead and turn to 2 Kings chapter 9. We're continuing our study of the life and times of Elijah and Elisha. And last week we finished chapter 8, getting kind of caught up on what's going on down in Judah, since Kings primarily focuses on the northern kingdom in comparison to the Chronicles, where Chronicles kind of focuses more on the southern kingdom. At the end of chapter 8, we get caught up on Jehoram, king of Judah, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, and kind of helps us set all the pieces in place for chapter 9. So I want to quickly recap that because it's kind of really important to what we're about to talk about in chapter 9. So at this point in time now, as we get from chapter 8 to chapter 9, the king in Israel is Joram. Joram is king of Israel. He is the son of Ahab. Yes, okay. I'm not trying to be tricky here. I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the same page here. But he's not the eldest son of Ahab. He is the second oldest. The oldest died at the very beginning of 2 Kings chapter 1, so he is the next in line because his brother did not have any sons. So Joram, son of Ahab, is currently king in Israel. Who is king in Judah at the end of chapter 8? Ahaziah. Not Ahaziah, the older brother of Joram, who died and had no kids. This is Ahaziah, Joram's nephew. So Jehoram, king of Judah, the son of Jehoshaphat, had married the daughter of Ahab, Athaliah, who we're going to talk more about when we get into later chapters. And she's all bad news. We'll get to that. They had a son, Ahaziah. He is now king in Judah. So you have Joram in Israel, Ahaziah in Judah. You have an uncle-nephew relationship there. There is a strong family bond there. Who is king in Aram or Syria at this time? Hazael, yes. Ben-Hadad is no longer king. We saw earlier in chapter 8, Hazael had gotten a sickness. He heard that Elisha was in the land. He sends Hazael with a gift, like, hey, go see if I'm going to get better. Ask him about it. And Elisha informs Hazael that, hey, Hazael, you're going to be the new king in Aram. You can go ahead and tell Ben-Hadad he's not going to die from this sickness. In fact, he doesn't technically. But you're going to be the next king. And we see at the end of that section, Hazael basically smothers Ben-Hadad to death and takes over the kingdom. And as far as we know, Ben-Hadad did not have any sons. Secular history, the Bible doesn't mention him, at least in secular history, seems to indicate that he did not have any sons. We don't know exactly what what the succession line was supposed to be. I don't think it was intended to be Hazael. I think Hazael has done some things to get in that position and take over. But all of this has been foretold. Way back in 1 Kings chapter 19, we knew Hazael was going to be king because God told Elijah while he's on Mount Horeb, go and anoint Hazael as king over Aram. This is a long time ago. I mean, Elisha hasn't even been on the scene yet, and he's telling Elijah, go anoint Hazael king of Aram. So, should not be a surprise. Now, in chapter 9, we just started chapter 9. The first 3 verses, I think, is all we got through. We're introduced to a man named Jehu. Now, this Jehu, he's usually called son of Nimshi. We talked about this last week. But in a couple sections here, he's called Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. This is not the same Jehoshaphat who is king of Judah. It's a different Jehoshaphat. That's why I brought it up. As far as we know, Jehu is of the northern kingdom. He seems to be an army official of some kind of supremacy in the northern kingdom of Israel. But to avoid confusion, they tend to call him son of Nimshi, which we should understand as descendant of, not like direct father-son. Descendant of is probably the better way to think of it. So calling him son of Nimshi is not incorrect, but they would probably call him that to avoid confusion of, oh, this guy's related to the king of Judah. Like, no, not that Jehoshaphat. Like, that's the one we always think of. But that's why they typically call him son of Nimshi. But don't get confused by that if son of Jehoshaphat comes in there. We talked about that. But as we see kind of the end of chapter 8 and into chapter 9, Jehoram Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, have decided to go and do what? They've gone on this enterprise together to go where? Go to war against who? Against Hazael, king of Aram. At Ramoth Gilead, which is the exact same thing that happened back in 1 Kings when King Ahab, king of Israel, and King Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, decided to make war against Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. That did not turn out very well. That's how Ahab dies. He dies in that battle. In fact, we see that Joram, king of Israel, is wounded in this battle. He doesn't die there, but the parallels are just, no one bothered to check the history books to think, hey, maybe we should not do this. So just a really interesting thing. But getting back to Jehu, Jehu is kind of here in chapter 9. He's at Ramoth Gilead. He's with the army there. But King Joram is not, because he's gone back to Jezreel to recover from his wounds. And King Ahaziah of Judah has also gone to Jezreel to go visit him, because he's such a nice nephew. He's gone to visit his uncle as he recovers. So the army of Israel is still out there, but they don't have the king in charge over there. He's at a commission for the time being. So these are all the pieces that are in place here. And we have Elisha in verse 1 of chapter 9. He sends a man from the company of prophets. He himself does not go. He sends one of the other guys to go to Ramoth Gilead, go and anoint Jehu as king over Israel, and then get out of there. Basically, that's his instructions. Go anoint him king and get out of there. Well, this instruction had also been told to Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19. The exact same time that God told Elijah to anoint Hazael king over Aram, he also tells him, anoint Jehu son of Nimshi as king over Israel. So this is, again, not a new thing. We're just now seeing these pieces finally put in place, and now they're all going to run as God has said way back in a whole nother book, in a whole nother generation. So we're seeing the next generation kind of come to fruition here. And one thing I do want to point out, I'll read it actually, because I don't want to mess up the wording on it. In 1 Kings chapter 19, let me read real quickly 1 Kings 19, and I'm going to read 15 through 17. It says, the Lord said to him, and that's speaking of Elijah, go back the way you came to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king of Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel-Molah to succeed you as prophet. And this is the key verse here. Jehu will put to death any who escaped the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escaped from the sword of Jehu. So God is appointing these men for conflict, for hostility. There is going to be trouble, but this is God's will. There is going to be, in a way, judgments of God in a very strong and powerful and terrible way. These men are there for that purpose. These are not perfect men, especially Jehu. We'll talk about Jehu and his life as we go on. But they're going to serve a very specific purpose for God here. So now we're seeing it come to fruition. And we only got through verse 3 of chapter 9, so I'm not going to go any further than that. Any thoughts, comments before we continue on? I think I kind of recapped everything. I don't think I missed too much. This is where we are. Go ahead, Jeff.
I guess I'll just mention the fact that we often wonder about why such delays. Why we didn't fulfill his will immediately. Just need to remind ourselves that God is watching over every human being, and we're all interconnected. And so things need to go in a certain order for God's plan to lay out as he desires. And so sometimes he may determine destruction for someone, but it's going to wait because he's also attending to other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would say in this case, I think we can speak to this case specifically, and in many others, especially concerning the Israelites in the Old Testament, is it's oftentimes because of mercy. He's giving them a chance to repent. He's giving them a chance to come back. When Ahab, after the death of Naboth, and Ahab goes and takes his vineyard, He's told, hey, everything's going to go badly for you, but then Ahab mourns and he puts on sackcloth. He's very humbled about it. And then God says, well, I'm not going to have this happen in his lifetime. Which, what a mercy to Ahab of all people. And Ahab had his chances. I mean, we've talked about with the story of Ahab. I won't get too much into it, but Ahab had every opportunity to figure it out and to come back to God. And God showed him many times that he was in control and he could do these things. And Ahab never quite turns the corner. And I like to compare him to Nebuchadnezzar in many ways, because Nebuchadnezzar had many opportunities, but Nebuchadnezzar eventually figures it out. It seems by the end of his life, he understands that, this God of Daniel that I keep having these encounters with, this is the God, and I'm going to declare it to all the nations. Whereas Ahab never gets to that point. He's just constantly hitting up against God and constantly fighting against God, and at some point, God's had enough, and that's it. So we think, why does God not do it? Well, he's probably trying to help somebody. And, we get impatient, but, sometimes mercy is more important than getting judgment right this second. I think James would agree with that. It's chapter 1. Nope. Somebody help me with that. Mercy triumphs over judgment. That's James chapter 2. 2:10. Yeah, somewhere in there. I know it's in there somewhere. Thank you. I just couldn't think of it off the top of my head. But yeah, so I think of verses like that, and I see them in play here in the Old Testament. So, and for Ahab, specific examples like that, we can speak to that for sure, because God says, because he humbled himself this one time, I'm going to give him another opportunity. Of course, Ahab squanders that. So, unfortunate. Any other comments before we continue on? All right. That was quite a recap. I'm tired. But it's important so we kind of understand the context of where we are, because we kind of ended in a weird spot. So like I said, Elisha sent this man to go anoint Jehu king over Israel, and now we're going to see it happen. So someone read for us verses 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 4 through 10, please. Okay. So it's good to note that the man that Elisha sent does exactly what he's told. He goes, anoints him, he gets out. He is not sticking around. He is gone. We're not going to see him anymore. I assume he goes back to Elisha after that, but he's not sticking around with Jehu. So we see he goes to Ramoth Gilead, and remember, it's the exact same city that Ahab had tried to take, exact same scenario. But the only difference here is Joram, because he's been wounded, has traveled back to Jezreel. So Jehu's kind of in charge here. He's taken over things. He's the commander in charge. And so we're able to kind of have this situation. Obviously, the providence of God is working here, that he's able to do this. And so, I've kind of talked about how, both Joram and now Ahaziah are in Jezreel. So all that's in place. So the man that is sent, he basically gets Jehu away from the others. It seems that they're alone when this happens. And he anoints him as king over Israel. Again, this instruction was given back to Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 16. But he's also given instructions on here's what you need to do now. And these instructions are to destroy the house of Ahab. Now, we kind of mentioned before, Ahab himself is already dead. He died at the end of 1 Kings. So Ahab is gone, but as we've mentioned before, his second eldest son, Joram, is sitting on the throne of Israel. His wife, Jezebel, is still alive. We'll talk about her quite a bit in some gruesome detail. So his household, his family, his lineage still thrives. And so when God says he's going to make the house of Ahab like that of Jeroboam and Baasha, he's saying that like those former kings of Israel, this lineage is going to be completely wiped out. It's not going to continue. They're not going to continue on the throne of Israel. And if you don't remember, you can reference 1 Kings chapter 15 through 16, where we see these things happen. Jeroboam's household was wiped out when his son Nadab was in power. It's actually Baasha who goes in and kills him and takes over the kingship. He usurps the throne. And then his son Elah is king over Israel, and his son is taken out by Zimri and all of his household. So they're wiped out again. And then Zimri only reigns for 7 days until Omri throws him over. And of course, Omri was the father of Ahab. So we've had multiple families of different tribes, actually, fighting over the throne of Israel. It's not like Judah, where you have a direct line from David all the way down. That's not what goes on in Israel. It's just constant turmoil. It's not the same promise that the kings of Israel, were able to follow, having, a son of David on the throne of Jerusalem. So it's very chaotic. So when Jehu is told these things, he's going to know exactly what he's talking about, because this is not distant history. We're talking maybe, just a handful of generations before, and it's happened multiple times. This is not some sort of new thing that he's being introduced to. He would know how these things were. So Ahab's house is now going to be destroyed in this way. Jehu's got his orders. He's got his anointing. He's basically told what he needs to do. And then, like I said, after these instructions are given, the man from Elisha, he flees. He gets out of there. He's not sticking around as he was told. So that's all for that section. Anything up through verse 10 we need to talk more about. Excuse me. Okay. All right. We're going to see these marching orders and how they're carried out then. Someone read for us verses 11 through 16, please. 11 through 16.
Then Jehu came out of the servants of his master, and one said to him, "Is all well? Why did this madman come to you?" And he said, to them, "You know the man and his babble." And they said, "A lie. Tell us now." So he said, "Thus and thus he spoke to me, saying, Thus says the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel." Then each man hastened to take his garment, and put it under him on the top of the steps. And they blew trumpets, saying, "Jehu is king." So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had been defending Ramoth Gilead, and he and all his Israel against Hazael, king of Syria. But king of Jordan, he returned in Jezreel to recover from his wound which the Syrians had inflicted on him, when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, "If you are so minded, let no one leave or escape from the city to go and tell it to Jezreel." So Jehu rode in the chariot and went to Jezreel, for Jehoram was laid up there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see Joram.
Okay, thank you. So after the guy runs out, and Jehu goes and returns to the other officers. They want to know, like, hey, what was that all about, basically, and and they don't seem to I assume they know where he came from. I assume they know that he was from the company of prophets. Maybe they even knew that Elisha specifically sent him, because they kind of talk badly about this guy. Why'd this madman come to you? Or some translations will say the word maniac, something along those lines. Not like kind words, not very respectful, so they seem to look down on him. Why did he want, what did he want with you? And Jehu seems to at first say like, stuff. A perfect just man answer to any question. Yeah, just stuff, whatever. But they kind of press, and he tells them that, hey, I've been anointed king over Israel. Now, I see this as a really interesting kind of conflict here, because they were just talking bad about this guy of the company of prophets. And now as soon as Jehu says, oh yeah, he anointed me king of Israel, they're like, all right, we're on board. Like, there's just this really quick turnaround. I kind of assume this has more to do with Jehu. I assume he's probably pretty popular among his men. That's my guess. But they drop everything. No one seems to say, hey, this doesn't seem like a good idea. They're all on board. The descriptions they get in 13 says they hurried and took their cloaks off and spread them under him on the steps. They blow the trumpet. They shout, Jehu is king. I mean, this is big thing, and they're not holding back. So I don't know if Jehoram was just not very popular among them, or Jehu just was very popular, or suddenly they decided they wanted to follow what the prophet of God says. I don't know. But what we do know is that they are behind him all the way, 100%, and they're going to go with him. So given this situation now, we have the army of Israel that was at Ramoth Gilead with Jehu, and now he's heading back. He's not staying over in Ramoth Gilead. He's going to Jezreel to go confront Joram and Ahaziah, who also happens to be there at Jezreel. So he gets in his chariot. He's going to go and ride out to him. One interesting detail he says is, don't let anyone slip out and break the news. We've got a plot going here. We've got a conspiracy. We got to keep a hush-hush until just the right moment. So he gives a very specific instruction there at the end of verse 15. And we're going to see that seems to hold true. No one breaks the news to Joram early or anything. So we're going to see how Jehu's plan goes on. Any comments, questions up through verse 16? All right. So I'm going to read for us verses 17 through 21 then. 17 through 21.
Now a watchman had stood on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came. And he said, I see a company of men. And Joram said, get a horseman and send him to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? So the horseman went to meet him and said, thus says the king, is it peace? Jehu said, what have I to do with peace? Turn around and follow me. So the watchman reported, saying, the messenger went to them, but is not coming back. Then he sent out a second horseman, who came to them and said, thus says the king, is it peace? And Jehu answered, what have I to do with peace? Turn around and follow me. So the watchman reported, saying, he went up to them and is not coming back. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Then Joram said, make ready, and his chariot was made ready. Then Joram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah went out, each in his chariot, and they went out to meet Jehu, and met him on the property of Naboth the Jezreelite.
Okay, thank you. All right, so some really interesting details in here. We'll probably go through this section quickly, but Jehu and his troops, they're approaching Jezreel, and they're spotted by the lookouts. And this is a pretty good lookout. He sees him, and Joram says, well, go send a horseman, see what this is about, because where are these troops supposed to be?
At the camp ready to fight.
Yeah, they're supposed to be back in Ramoth Gilead fighting the Syrians, fighting the Arameans. Like, why are they here? Go find out what's going on. So they send out a horseman, and he says like, hey, you come in peace, is everything fine? And Jehu's like, what have you got to do, peace? What do we got to do with peace here? Get behind me. Come on. And so he doesn't go back. And so they're like, well, he's not coming back. Send out another horseman. The exact same thing happens. And I kind of laugh to myself when I read through this, because I'm like, this happens in history in other places too. For those of you who like your Napoleonic era history, when Napoleon gets exiled to Elba and he tries to come back to France, he has this thing. He has a small contingent of soldiers, but the French monarch's like, well, we're not having this. Go send some soldiers to take care of this and arrest him or something. But when they show up to arrest Napoleon as he's marching to France, he says, well, like, hey, I'm your emperor. You want to shoot me? And they're like, no, not really. He's like, well, come in behind me and we'll keep going. And so as they keep sending soldiers to go arrest Napoleon, they just join him instead as he's coming in. So he just takes France without a fight. It sounds kind of very similar sort of thing going on here. But so I'm sure Joram is frustrated by this because he has no idea what's going on, except the lookout does provide one piece of information. He says, it looks like the riding of Jehu, son of Nimshi, because of the way he's riding his chariot. Great lookout. I don't know if I'd be able to figure that out just because of the way someone is riding his chariot. But he's correct. So he knows at least that much. It's like, hey, this is one of my officers. So he goes out to meet him in his own chariot. Ahaziah comes with Joram to go meet him. And the most interesting detail here is in verse 21, where they meet on the property of Naboth. Now, this has all sorts of implications, and we're going to kind of see how that plays out in just a second. But this is not a coincidence that they just happened to meet at the property of Naboth. This is definitely God's plan here. God is setting this up very specifically. So it's more than just like, poetic justice, if you will. There's a plan going on here. Comments, thoughts up through verse 21.
Either Jehu has to, Jehu has to be the most popular person in the world, or Joram is the most unpopular person.
Or both.
Everybody that's under Jehu wants to join him.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, his other officers, they're ready to call him king at the drop of a hat. Like, oh yeah, I've been anointed by this madman you guys just talked about as king over Israel. And they're like, all right, let's do it. No questions asked, no more debate. So yeah, and I wonder about that. Were things really bad under Joram? Things aren't great. We know that, but how bad did it really get? We kind of talked about 2 Chronicles and how it records King Jehoram of Judah, and how no one was really sad when he died, and they just kind of threw his body somewhere because they didn't really want to bury him like a king. They didn't like him at all. I don't know if it's quite the same, but he definitely doesn't have the same respect that Jehu does. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Okay. Someone read for us verses 22 through 29 now. 22 through 29.
Now it happened when Joram saw Jehu, and he said, "Is it peace, Jehu?" So he answered, "What peace, as long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft are so many?" And Joram turned around and fled, and said to Ahaziah, "Treachery, Ahaziah." Now Jehu drew his bow with full strength and shot Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow came out of his heart, and he sank down in his chariot. Then Jehu said to Bidkar, his captain, "Pick him up and throw him into the tract of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I were riding together behind Ahab his father, that the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says the Lord, and I will repay you in this plot, says the Lord. Now therefore take and throw him on the plot of ground according to the word of the Lord." But when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the road to Ben-Hagad, so that Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also in the chariot." And they did so at the ascent to Gur, which is by Ravine. Then he fled to Megiddo, and and died there. And his servants carried him in the chariot to Jerusalem, and buried him in his tomb with his father in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king over Judah.
Okay, thank you. So several very important things just happened here. Joram and Jehu, they meet, they exchange words, but it becomes pretty apparent quickly that Jehu does not, quote, come in peace. So Joram tries to flee. Jehu is apparently a really good shot with a bow and arrow and takes him out before he can get away. So suddenly the king of Israel, Joram, is dead. The son of Ahab has died. And this all seems to probably happen right there when they're on the property. I don't think he got very far at all when he tried to get away. Now, Jehu recalls here, apparently he was present when everything in 1 Kings chapter 21 went down, as far as, he said he was behind Ahab when these words were declared to Ahab. In fact, let's actually go back to 1 Kings for a second. I want to read a little bit of that. In chapter 21. Because I want to kind of see how it's worded exactly here. In 1 Kings chapter 21, it says, after Naboth has been killed, Ahab has gone to take and seize his property. Verse 17, then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who rules in Samaria. He is now in Naboth's vineyard, where he's gone to take possession of it. Say to him, this is what the Lord says, have you not murdered a man and seized his property? Then say to him, this is what the Lord says, in the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood, yes, yours. Ahab said to Elijah, so you have found me, my enemy. I have found you, he answered, because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. I am going to bring a disaster on you. I will consume your descendants and cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make your house like that of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and that of Baasha, son of Ahijah, because you have provoked me to anger and have caused Israel to sin. And he goes on a little bit more about Jezebel. We'll talk about Jezebel in a bit. But basically, Jehu is recalling this and saying, okay, it's time to fulfill this prophecy. It's time to fulfill the word of the Lord here. Now, again, how much respect does Jehu have for God? We're not told very much about him up to this point, but it sounds like, oh man, he really likes God. He wants to do what God has prophesied and all this. We're going to kind of find out that he's going to go with God as long as God's plan involves him getting good things. It's going to be one of those kind of situations. But for now, he's doing what God is wanting him to do, and he's fulfilling these words that Elijah spoke back in 1 Kings chapter 21. So again, it's been some time. It's come to the next generation, but it is now coming to fruition. So the body of Ahab's son Joram is discarded in the field of Naboth, the same place that Naboth had basically stolen from Naboth when Naboth had been murdered. So again, not poetic justice. This is God fulfilling his word. This is not happenstance or coincidence. This is what God said would happen. Now, switching gears to Ahaziah, because Ahaziah is not of the lineage of Ahab. He's not of the house of Ahab, even though technically his mother is a descendant of Ahab. We're going to get to that problem in a little bit. But he just happened to be there. He was visiting, and he decided to go along with Joram, which, again, is not a good idea. But now he's out in the open, and he's being attacked, and so he tries to flee. Now, he makes it a bit farther. If we go by this accounting strictly with the details we have here, he's wounded during his flight, and he dies in Megiddo, which would be west of Jezreel. And he is given a proper burial. His servants take him in his chariot. He's buried. He passes away. Now, I do need to mention the details that we get in 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 9, about the same exact occurrence when Jehu is overthrowing everything. In 2 Chronicles 22, verse 9, it says that Jehu pursued Ahaziah to Samaria, captured him, and killed him, which Samaria is notably not Megiddo. It's actually much farther south. So the question becomes, like, how can this be? How can both of these be true? And I don't really know how to wrap my head around it because I don't quite understand the language as far as, is it calling like Samaria like the region? So does that include all of Israel? Megiddo is also confusing because it's a city and it's also a valley. So, how are we, are we being very specific with the location? Are we being generalized? Because then it could overlap. I don't really have a good answer for it. Just know that they do have slightly different accounts on that. So if you're interested, go ahead and look at that. I didn't really get too deep into it, but there are commentators that do. I'll refer you to them because I don't really have anything better than they suggest as far as that goes. Some also say, well, maybe it's just you got to combine the timelines. Like, he is wounded, then he's captured, then he escapes again, and then he dies somewhere else. It's not really clear to me because neither of those really say that. So I'm gonna push that off for now. But if anyone else has an idea, I'm open to hearing it because I read that and I'm like, well, it says that here and this here. How can those both be true? It just may be how we're understanding the terminology. So I'm trying not to get too deep into what I don't understand.
Sam, what's your translation say that he fled to where? I'm back in 2 Kings 9.
In 2 Kings 9, he fled up the road to Beth Hagen. Jehu chased him, shouting, "Kill him too." They wounded him in his chariot on the way to Gur near Iblim, but he escaped to Megiddo and died there.
Now, Megiddo is quite a bit down south.
My understanding is the city of Megiddo, I believe, was west of Jezreel, isn't it? And am I looking at a bad map last?
Solomon had chariots at Megiddo, but they were supposed to be up in the area of Ephraim,
Right.
not too far from Samaria.
Okay. Well, Ephraim is also a big territory. I'll have to look at another map. I might come back to that. But they do use different wordings because 2 Chronicles 22:9 does say Samaria specifically. But also that you could say, well, is it the valley of Samaria or is it the city of Samaria?
The spelling is
So,
Megiddo, and this is Megiddo.
yeah.
But it might be interesting.
Yeah. We might have to do a whole study on that. That's why I don't want to get too deep into it today because I don't have a good answer on that. It's something I need more time on. But anyway, I'm gonna stop there. Any comments, thoughts up through verse 29, except for the geography question about Ahaziah's death? I don't have an answer for that quite yet. Okay. Well, we're gonna stop there. We're out of time. So we're maybe we're only part way through all the things Jehu is going to do. So we see that Jehu is following the instructions he was given so far, wipe out the house of Ahab. Well, he's started with Ahab's son, the king of Israel. He's out. The next section of this chapter, we're going to talk about the death of Jezebel, because, she's still around, but she won't be for much longer. And then when we get into chapter 10, it's going to talk about Jehu wiping out basically the rest of Ahab's household, going and taking out the prophets of Baal in their temple, all these things that Jehu is going to do. But then at the very end of chapter 10, we're going to see the shortfalls of Jehu, and we're going to have to talk about those also. The other thing to mention, and I think it's important to mention here, because when we go beyond after verse 29, we're not really going to talk about Ahaziah anymore. But the death of Ahaziah here is also equally important, as much as the death of Joram, king of Israel. The death of Ahaziah, king of Judah, is going to have another big effect in Judah. So we see a usurping of the throne here going on right now with Jehu in Israel. But the death of Ahaziah is going to cause a usurping of the throne in Judah. Because of his death, there's going to be a power vacuum. We're going to talk about that when we get to chapter 11, immediately after our Jehu section. And things are going to get worse. It's my anthem here about this story. It's going to get worse. And we'll talk about that as we get there. But that's what's ahead. I doubt we'll get to chapter 11 next week. We may get through, we'll definitely finish chapter 9. We'll either get through most of chapter 10 or at least part of it. So that's probably where we'll get next week. So if you haven't already, read up through at least chapter 10, and that way we'll be ready to talk about it then, and then we'll continue on after that. So, but we'll stop there. We're out of time. Thank you for your comments, and maybe next week I'll also have a better answer for you on where did Ahaziah actually die, because I think that's an important question to answer, because people will ask that question. It's a good question, so I'll think about that one a little bit more.